Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. The other day, my wife received a communication from a young friend of hers who's now off in college, a girl who was raised in a Christian home and yet now seems to have been led astray by her liberal professors. Naturally my wife was pretty upset about this. I don't really know exactly what the situation is, whether it was a case of the Christian parents of this girl failing to teach their daughter what she needed to know in order to survive morally and intellectually outside the home, or whether it's a case of the child rebelling against what she was taught as a child. Or perhaps there's other issues at play here that I'm not aware of. But I thought one thing I could do, maybe not to resolve this situation per se, but to contribute to the resolution of this issue in a broader sense, is to take a look at the fundamental philosophies underlying the different sides of the political spectrum and help to educate people about not just the political issues that people are tearing each other apart over, but the fundamental philosophies that underlie those differences. Because I think a perspective of the bigger picture is going to be helpful for all concerned. So we've got liberals and we've got conservatives, but what does it mean to be liberal or conservative? In the most literal sense, liberal simply means generous, and conservative simply means careful. So you have to be generous or careful with regards to something. And you can be liberal with regards to one thing and conservative with regards to something else. For example, lately I was watching some videos over on the Warrior Poet Society Network YouTube channel, and the host, John Lovell, politically is pretty conservative, but he's pretty liberal when it comes to the expenditure of ammunition. If there's a target downrange begging for lead, he dispenses that lead generously. In the sense of politics, someone who is liberal is someone who is generous in terms of the amount of power and the scope of authority that they're willing to entrust to government, whereas someone who is conservative is careful about how much power they're willing to let the government have. But there is an even more fundamental philosophical dichotomy that drives people to be politically either liberal or conservative. Specifically, people who are politically liberal believe that people are basically good. And so if a person does bad things, it's because of external pressures that drove them to do those things. Something in their environment wasn't right, and that's why they acted inappropriately. And so it is the responsibility of government, under the liberal mentality, to create an environment where the natural goodness of people will be expressed and where they will be free from, these external stressors that might drive them to do anything wrong. Meanwhile, there's no real danger in giving the government a lot of power to shape the social environment because people are basically good, and so the people who are wielding that power will tend to do so in a way that's good for everybody. By contrast, people who are politically conservative believe that people are basically self-serving. A person will tend to do what's best for himself, ultimately irrespective of other people's interests. Now, that's not to say that all people are criminals. Most selfish people are still intelligent enough to recognize that they can get ahead faster in life and with a lot less personal risk by working with people for mutual benefit than by taking advantage of others in ways that might elicit retaliation. For example, here in Idaho, if I have a surplus of potatoes and you've got a surplus of something else, there's a good chance we can barter and work out a trade agreement that is mutually beneficial. We both come out ahead in our own estimation, and so we both feel like it's good for us. By contrast, some random guy of lesser intelligence sees that I've got a bunch of potatoes and decides he's just going to take them from me. Well, first of all, I'm not just going to let him do that. I'm going to defend myself, and so there's a good chance that may not work out too well for him in the end. And even if he succeeds in killing me and taking my potatoes, there's a good chance that my friends may hunt him down and kill him later in retaliation. So, again, it's not that everybody's a criminal, but everybody has that innate self-seeking nature. And because people are innately self-serving, we need to be very careful how much power we allow one person to exercise over others, especially when that power would allow them to benefit themselves at others' expense without fear of retaliation. So that's why conservatives are always in favor of limited government and of checks and balances that will sort of pit one part of government against another, so that no one person or entity can ever act without fear of retaliation. So that is the fundamental difference between the two sides of the political spectrum. Liberals believe that people are basically good. Conservatives believe that people are basically selfish. Now, where do Christians fall on this spectrum, or does it matter? Well, a Christian, pretty much by definition, is someone who believes in the atonement of Christ. We believe that Jesus Christ lived a sinless life, died on the cross, and rose again from the dead as a substitutionary sacrifice to pay the penalty for our sins so that we could be reconciled to God. Now, where did our sin come from? Why did he have to do that? Well, make a long story short, the first man, Adam, rebelled against God, and all of his descendants, all of mankind, are born into Adam's rebellion, into that spirit of original sin. So we all have this innate propensity to do that which is evil or that which is selfish. And so a Christian is sort of compelled to be politically conservative because the basic assumption of conservatism, namely that all people are basically self-serving, is a necessary consequence of the doctrine of original sin, which is one of the foundational doctrines of Christianity. For a Christian to call themselves a liberal and say that people are basically good would be for them to say that Christ died for nothing. And so the person professing Christianity is compelled by the doctrines of Christianity to be politically conservative at a fundamental level. Now, as you get into the minutiae of the different political issues, there may be more room for discussion and debate on certain things. But I think sometimes we get so caught up in those minutiae that we fail to take a step back and see the bigger picture of the underlying philosophy behind the political spectrum. And if we're not careful, we may find ourselves supporting minutiae political measures that actually run contrary to our own philosophy. I think that's probably what happened in the case of my wife's young friend, whom I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And so I hope that taking this step back and looking at these issues in the big picture sense may provide some clarity for someone out there. In any case, thank you for watching The Idahoan Show.